Hey guys, welcome to Ring Steel TV. Today is episode 7 in our $500 1,000 yard steel elk challenge. Stay tuned. Hey YouTube, welcome back to Ring Steel TV. Today we're going to be finishing up the scope installation. We're going to walk through how to set up the scope, getting behind the scope, how to do the diopter adjustment, the cheek weld adjustment, and all those little things that will make the scope be set up just perfect for long range shooting. So I hope you enjoyed today's video. Let's get on with the build. As everything's clean, the last thing that we're going to clean is we're going to clean the scope here on these barrels. Just get any manufacturing oils that might be on them off. Same thing, just a little bit of isopropyl alcohol, nothing major. This should be fairly clean anyway. But we want a good solid metal to metal contact with nothing between them. And we'll go ahead and set our scope down into the scope rings. And I'm just going to tentatively just set them right in the middle. We'll put our caps back on. Make sure they're in the right orientation. And then we'll start screwing these in. I'll just put them in the middle ones. I'm not going to tighten this cap down at all. All this is to keep the scope from falling off. We're going to have to go through a process of adjusting the scope to our eye. I think the main lesson here with installing scopes is if it only takes you, 10 minutes to mount the rings and install a scope, you're doing yourself a disservice, only because all these little tweaks that we're doing here, it adds more consistency and repeatability to the scope. And when you're dealing with budget optics, especially at this price point that we're talking about here, everything just kind of adds up. So just as a matter of process, anytime I mount a scope, I don't care if it's an expensive scope or an inexpensive scope, this is the process that I use. And it's just a few things that I can check off my list and say, yep, I know the scope's mounted right, I shouldn't have any issues there. Now, that's not to say we don't have an internal issue with the scope that we might have to deal with, and we'll just deal with that, as we start shooting the gun. If we can't get groups to group, maybe there's something wrong with the scope. And in that case, I opted for this Athlon optic, and even though it was used, it has a lifetime warranty through Athlon, so I can send it back for a new unit or repair. So let me get these down a little bit, and we'll move on to the next step. Okay guys, we have our scope mounted to the rifle. You'll see here the most important thing when you're doing this is just to be sure that this gap here is the same on both sides. You don't want one side to be all the way down touching the metal. You need to have a gap there, and it needs to be the same on both sides. And when you torque them down, you go through a torquing process. Now, what I've done is I've left the scope here, you can see, a little bit loose so I can move it around. And the reason for that is we want to make sure that this scope is completely level on the base, and I'll show you that. Let me get my tool. Okay, I'm back. So the next thing we want to do is ensure that the scope is level on the gun. And what I like to do is there's a flat spot on the base of the scope, and then of course the flat top on the Picatinny rail. And I got this tool here that I started using here a few years ago that I really like. It has a little piece here that sits in the Picatinny rail. You can see that wedge-shaped cutout, and then it comes with a couple of these that slide in, and as you slide them in, it stays perfectly level, so you can make up that gap difference. There's also a second piece here that's a little taller if your scope's sitting a little bit taller. And so you just kind of slip this in here on the Picatinny rail. Might be kind of hard to show you guys. And then you take your little wedge and drop your wedge in there. And then what you want to do is move the scope until it sits level on that. Both the rail and there's a point you can feel it as you turn it, where it's sitting just perfectly level. And there, that's in. So that scope now should be fairly level to the base of the Picatinny rail. It's level enough for us to take it out and shoot it. A lot of times these budget scopes will not turn perfectly straight up and down as you do the elevation adjustment up and down. So when we do our tall target test and check the tracking on the scope, we'll also be checking to see if this goes straight up and down, and if it doesn't, we'll make minor adjustments to that. So I'll show that to you as we get out there. So anyway, this is still a little bit loose so that I can move it forward and back and get it to my eye and before we clamp any of this down. So we'll get on to that step next and show you guys how to do it. Like I said, you know, this is a process here. It doesn't happen quickly. You don't just throw a scope on and then go out and start shooting. There's a lot to take into consideration to ensure that that scope is mounted to the gun properly with the least amount of stress on it. And when you're talking about budget optics, we really need to get everything in our favor. So this is one of the ways that we do that. Next thing we're going to look at is this is a good time to get our height, our comb adjustment, to get our eye in line with the scope. And I've already sat behind the scope and my cheek needs to be up in order for my eye to align properly with the scope. So this is a good time to get this piece sorted with this here. So what I'll do is I'll sit behind the scope and I'll put this piece on the top, and we'll just try it and see which one of these, because there's 3 different heights that came with it, if you'll remember correctly. And we'll figure out which one of these 3 put my eye in alignment, and I'll go ahead and put it underneath this neoprene cheek rest adjustment. So I'll go do that. Okay, as I sat behind the scope, this middle one appeared to be the correct one that I wanted to have on the scope. So what I'm going to do now is just roll this neoprene forward like this. We'll drop this in here and just roll it back over the top. Okay, that's well centered and it's on now. We'll go sit behind it and just validate everything's good. And that's pretty much how that cheek riser gets installed. As we make adjustments to the scope to ensure we're sitting behind the scope exactly right and that we have good perfect eye relief and perfect location, we might adjust this a little bit more. And it could mean that we take the foam that's made out of it and shave it just a little bit and put it back in, but we want to ensure that we get this perfect. So anyway, that's the cheek weld adjustment. We'll talk about eye relief, and then I think the last thing we need to do is install our bubble level, and I'll show you guys that. All right, guys, so we're ready now to adjust this scope. In the last video, we got the scope on, and we left it just loose enough to kind of move the scope back and forth. What I've done is I've just set up my bench here, and I'm looking across the room at a white refrigerator that's in front of me. You'll need something white to cover the whole front of your scope when you're looking down it. You don't want to see anything downrange. You just want to see a white screen. And first thing we need to do is just kind of adjust our eye relief. And what you want to do is start by putting your scope onto maximum power. So in this case it's 16. I've moved it all the way over to 16x. Once you get the eye relief set at 16x, it'll be correct for all the other settings. So we'll get behind the gun, and I would do this in several different positions. You'll want to do this in your prone position, you'll want to do this standing up, and you want to do it from a bench. But if you primarily shoot from a bench, and I primarily shoot from a bench when I'm hunting, I'll usually be in a blind, which for me would be the same as being on a bench. So that's my primary position, and I'll look to set the scope for that more than likely. But we'll get down on the scope here and we'll get really comfortable. And then what I'm looking for to see if I have a full view of the reticle. And if I don't have a full view, I'm going to push it forward or backwards, and we're going to try and adjust it so that I see the entire reticle, and if I move my head up and down, left and right, it should blank completely out very quickly. You should not see a ghosted halo around it. You should see a perfect reticle. And if you move your head forward, you'll see what I'm talking about. If you move your head backwards from that position, you'll see the bokeh in there. But if you get your head just right, it'll be completely open from edge to edge without any darkness around the edges of the reticle. So that's the first thing I'm going to do, is I'm going to get in there and just adjust that. So let me do that now. Okay, so I can see a very clear view when I get my head down on the scope. And now what I like to do next is I like to adjust my cheek height and make sure that's in the proper position. So when I'm doing both the scope adjustment and the cheek height adjustment, what I want to do is I want to close my eyes completely, and I want to get down into my firing position, and then I want to quickly open my eyes and take notice of where the reticle is. If I'm too low, then I need to increase my cheek height. If I'm too high, I need to lower my cheek height. If I'm a little left or a little right, I'll need to make an adjustment on that cheek adjustment too, or perhaps the way I'm holding my head. But the idea is here is when you get down on the gun with your eyes completely closed, I'm closing my eyes now, I'm not even on the gun. I'm going to close my eyes, I'm going to get down on the gun, get into my position, get really comfortable, no stress in my neck or my shoulders, and then I'm going to open my eye. Do I see a clear view? And then I'm going to make an adjustment, either up or down on my cheek rest or left to right if I need to do that. So again, my eyes are closed. I'm going to sit down on my gun, get very comfortable, open them up. Am I looking straight through it? If not, I need to make an adjustment. I'm going to keep doing this over and over again until I sit down on the gun and I open my eyes and I see a clear view through the scope. So that's the way that I would get both the eye relief front and back and the elevation set just right. There's going to be sometimes a tendency for your head to shift left or right just a little bit. You'll just need to mess with that. That could be the way that you're putting your head on it. It could also be that the cheek rest needs, just a little bit more material on the left side to push your cheek to the left, or a little less material on the left side to push your cheek to the right. But you want to keep doing this until you have a very clear view. Every time that you get down on it and you look at it, it's a clear view. And the reason for this is when you're shooting, and especially if you're shooting long strings or waiting a long time for an animal to come exactly where you want it to be, you don't want to build up any stresses. If you have to hold your head up off the cheek rest, there's a muscle in your neck that's doing that for you. If you have to force your head down, there's a muscle in your neck that's doing that for you. If you get on your gun just right every time and get the cheek right and then open your eyes and you have a clear view, that means nothing in your shoulders or your neck is putting any stress on your body. So you can sit there for a long time just looking through it. And that's really what you want to do, is you want to get that as perfect as possible. Now, once you've got all that set up and you've got a clear view through your scope, the next thing you want to do is adjust your diopter adjustment. And basically what you want to do is you want to get behind it, you want to keep your eyes closed, and you want to quickly open your eye and close it. Take a mental image of what you saw on the reticle, and then turn your diopter adjustment a full turn. Get back down on the gun, quickly open and close. Take a mental image. Was it better than the first image? If it was better than the first image, you're going in the right direction. Turn it another full turn. Get back down on the gun. Quickly open your eyes and close them. Take a mental image of that reticle. Is the reticle better or worse? If it gets worse, then you need to come back maybe a half turn. And you want to keep doing that until that reticle is perfect. When you open your eye and close it quickly, you take that mental image and you'll know whether or not that's in focus. What you don't want to do is sit there with your eyes open And keep looking at the reticle and adjust this because your eye will focus in on that reticle and it'll make those adjustments for you. And what you really want is you want that reticle to be as clear as possible, because if that reticle is perfectly in focus for your eye with the diopter, then when you adjust your parallax at long range, that image that's on the front of the glass will be perfectly focused on top of your reticle that's perfectly focused. Because if you try and focus your eye on the reticle and it's not perfectly in focus, the entire background's going to blur out. And when we're shooting, you always want to focus on that reticle, and you want to put that on top of your target. So if those two aren't perfectly in alignment, then you're going to have an issue. And the way to do that is to just get down on the gun on a blank surface, a white surface, open your eye, close it. Was the reticle perfectly clear with that split second that you had it open? That's what you're looking for, and that's what's most important. Once you get that adjusted, then go back and look. Get your head down, open your eye, make sure that you're perfectly in line with the scope. Make sure your height is good, your left to right is good, and your diopter is good. This is a process that happens after a little while. And then, guys, what I would suggest you do, and this is one thing I do, is I will come back to this for the next couple days, and I'll make a few more adjustments. That way, if I had, for whatever reason, during that whole time of adjusting this, you know, I got comfortable in a position that wasn't my normal position, that'll help balance it out. So I'll come back the next day, keep my eyes closed, get down on the gun, get comfortable, crack my eye open. Do I see the full reticle? If I do, I know I'm really good. And after a couple days, once all that is set, then I'll go in and I'll torque all these bolts. So you'll go and you'll torque all of these to whatever your torque spec is. In my case, it's 25 inch-pounds. I'll torque all of these down. I'll come back and I'll validate that I'm still good, that when I look through there, I see a full reticle, and then I'll know I'm good. Now, I won't Loctite these right away. What I want to do is I want to shoot the gun, and then I want to come back and I want to check the torque all these back down again. You will find that these will loosen up after that first shot, mainly because there's burrs and stuff on the inside of the screw threads, and those are settling in. Torque them down again. Go out and shoot another round, or bring your torque gun with you, your torque wrench with you. Shoot another round, torque them down. After about 4 or 5 shots, it'll settle in. They won't move anymore. Once they're torqued down to 25 that way, then they should hold indefinitely. Now, what I will do at some point is I will come back and I'll put some thread lock in here, but I'm not going to do that until after we do our tall target test, because we still might need to adjust the scope just a little bit so that we know that it's tracking perfectly horizontal up and down. So that's the process. Get behind your gun with your eyes closed. Get very comfortable. Open your eyes. Do you see a full picture? Yes or no? If you don't, you need to make an adjustment to the scope. So anyway, that's my recommendation for getting the scope set up. If you have any questions or comments, put them down below. Next up, we'll get the bubble level set up, and I'll see you on the bench with that. Okay, YouTube, we're back here at the bench. What we're going to do now is just level our bubble level here. All the bubble level does is gives us a reference point to ensure that our gun is perfectly straight up and down when we're sitting behind it and shooting at range. I'll do a different video on that at some point, but right now what I want to do is just ensure that it's level. And the process is super easy. There's nothing complicated about this. You'll just want to get bubble level. Here's one that I use here, and I'll set it down here on the Picatinny rail. You can see here, I'll just lay it there on the Picatinny rail when the gun's straight up and down. And then I'll look to ensure that that Picatinny rail is perfectly level. Okay, and then I'll come up here and I'll adjust the bubble level so it's perfectly level. Okay, so the bubble level is level. Just going to tighten it down now. And you want to set that to whatever inch pounds with your deal. I'm going down to 25 inch-pounds. I'm going to double check. Sometimes when you torque the bolts, it could take it off just a little bit, but that looks fine. And then I'll just take the bubble level and I'll just turn it 180 degrees here and put it back on the Picatinny rail just to make sure any manufacturing defects on the bubble level itself isn't skewing it at all. This one I know to be pretty straight both directions. And we're good to go. So anyway, that's the process of leveling your bubble level. As far as I'm concerned now, this scope is done. I'm going to go through, torque everything down, make sure that your base of your scope is flat. So that same tool that I showed you guys earlier that I use, I'll put that back in there and make sure that it's flat. And of course torque everything down. I've already done all that, so that piece is done. There are other ways that you can level your scope, at least initially. So what I'll tell you is this. I've done it several different ways. One is I'll do a plumb bob at some distance, and I know that plumb bob will be straight up and down based on gravity pulling it down. And then I'll make sure my gun is level. I'll look through the scope and I'll adjust the reticle, turn the scope until the reticle's perfectly up and down with the plumb bob. Another way that I do is I will shine a light through the front, a bright light through the front of this reticle, and project the image of the reticle against the wall behind me. And there will be a perfectly straight up and down line on that wall that I've probably done with like just a regular carpenter level with a straight up and down line. And I'll make sure that the reticle alignment is perfect. So those are a couple ways that you guys could do it if you don't have this tool. The reason why I use this tool and make the bottom of the scope base perfectly level with the Picatinny rail is because my experience has been, if you have an inexpensive scope, and maybe we should put a number to that. Let's say it's $500 or less, an inexpensive scope. I have not had a scope in that price range come where the reticle was perfectly up and down, left and right, and not canted within the scope, and follow the tracking of the elevation. And so all I want to do is I just want to get this close. So if you do it that way with projecting the image to the back wall, or a plumb bob out in the distance, or like I do with the little tool, there's always going to be a little bit of adjustment that needs to happen using your tall target test. When you adjust it up or down, it should track perfectly straight up and down. And when you shoot, and I'll show you this later on, you'll actually see that the scope is perfect. It doesn't mean that the reticle isn't canted. Every manufacturer has a tolerance for the reticle cant. If it's really bad and it's clearly visible to you, you'll want to send the scope back. But generally I can't see that it's canted, but when I shoot it, I know it's canted. So then I have to make an adjustment to the scope to ensure that the reticle is going straight up and down when we add elevation to it. We'll talk all about that in the tall target test. I think that's everything for the scope. We are done. Hope you guys enjoyed. Hey YouTube, I hope you enjoyed today's video. I really enjoyed setting up that scope for you. If you liked what you saw, please like, share, and subscribe. You can also leave comments down below and I'll be glad to answer any questions. Until next time, happy shooting.